What would you do if you had $1 million, or $5 million, or even $100 million? Would you give it all back to the poor? Would you buy a cabin in the woods and hide away from civilization? Would you risk everything to invest it back into a larger project that maybe could create jobs for talented and like-minded people, making their dreams come true and expanding the scope of your personal influence and your ability to shape the world and the future as you know it? Or would you just spike that money into the dirt like a football because that's what some of these studios did? Hi, if this is your first time here, my name is Tawny Platis. I'm a voice actor and a content creator, and if you have seen any of my content, you know I have a terrible fixation with TV and film, and very specifically, the lore behind the things that captured our collective imaginations as children and turned us into the confused and slightly emotionally damaged grown adult humans that we are today. Today, I want to talk about some of the biggest and most beloved financial disasters ever to make their way to the silver screen. For this list, I'll be sticking to the animated sci-fi movies and talking about the circumstances surrounding their catastrophic commercial failure before I give you the hard numbers for the actual net loss, and if that's exciting to you, please make sure to click subscribe and leave a like on the video or I will end up on one of my own lists. Probably the biggest failed content creators that nobody loves.
I have failed you.
So let's get started. In 1999, Warner Brothers released The Iron Giant, a science fiction period piece directed by Brad Bird in his first ever directorial debut. And if you recognize that name, it might be because he went on to direct The Incredibles and Ratatouille. The film is set at the height of the Cold War, and it's a story about a young boy with a weird name.
Hogarth.
You know Hogarth.
He befriends a giant alien robot and tries to protect him from the government. All that you probably already know, but what you might not know is that it was an enormous box office flop, costing a lot more to make than it raked in at box offices around the globe. So why did it fail? Especially when it had the hot mom who walked so Mrs. Incredible could run, a bisexual artist, and Vin Diesel giving the tear-jerking performance of a lifetime? Why didn't a visually stunning, beautifully written movie that was nominated for several awards with half the budget, staff, and time allowance as other animated films clean up at the box office? It's really because Warner Brothers dropped the ball when it came to marketing, and they were suspicious when it came to animated films since Quest for Camelot also failed at the box office the previous year. Then, when the film received the highest scores during test screens that the studio had seen in 15 years, they were all... And we're like, we have no marketing prepared, nary one Happy Meal nor Burger King toy planned. I guess we can make a poster? How about a promo poster? Maybe that'll get people to see it, yeah. Anyway, let's go back to pouring a metric ton of promotional money into the cinematic masterpiece Wild Wild West. Interesting enough, The Iron Giant was actually initially pitched as a concept to Don Bluth by one of his animators when they were working together in Ireland, but Bluth passed on it, likely because it wasn't nearly traumatic and heartbreaking enough for the director. Instead, director Brad Bird signed on to the project after reading the initial source material Pete Townsend was inspired by to create the musical, a book written by the late Sylvia Plath's husband, Ted Hughes, for his children to comfort them after her suicide. It particularly spoke to Bird at the time because he was coping with the death of his sister, who was murdered by her estranged husband. Bird dedicated the film to both Hughes and his sister Susan. One of Hughes' kids, Frida, saw the film when it was released and reportedly loved it, which may not have always been the case because the script went through several rewrites that included the film being set in present day, a sidekick dog, and a hip-hop soundtrack. Most of these were suggested at the desire of the producers to make the film more merchandisable. While the movie grossed approximately $5.7 million on its opening weekend in the US and $31.3 million worldwide, it actually cost a whopping $50 million to make. That's over $18 million that was just left on the table. And if someone told me that I lost $18 million, or even that I had $18 million to lose, well, you'd probably find me wandering in the street the next day screaming at traffic. Today, the movie's a cult classic, though. It's a beautifully directed film, and it's widely regarded as the best movie in Bird's filmography by every 90s baby with a dream in their heart and a healthy distrust of the government. What did not become a cult classic was Titan A.E., a movie that was so bad it's said to have been the final straw on the proverbial back of Fox Animation Studios. And at first glance, you'd think it would have been a hit. Joss Whedon was one of the screenwriters. Don Bluth, the guy who traumatized us all with All Dogs Go to Heaven and The Land Before Time, directed the film. And it had a stellar voice cast, including Bill Pullman, Nathan Lane, John Leguizamo, and Janeane Garofalo. But the production was plagued with issues, and much like a millennial at the therapist, it kept running into new problems every month, and as soon as they would find a solution, another one would pop up out of nowhere. The movie was originally supposed to be a live-action film, and Fox Animation dropped what they thought was a reasonable amount into development. When they checked in with the director to see how it was going after a few months, the guy was like, "I've literally made no progress." So they fired him and were like, "Let's give the project to Don Bluth and Gary Goldman and give them more money and let them animate it because they have zero experience in this genre and neither of them has ever worked with this newfangled CGI stuff. It'll be great." It was not great. Actually, it was a nightmare. Fox was already in a tough financial spot from Don Bluth's last movie they had released, Anastasia, because when Disney saw another animation studio trying to encroach on their territory, they decided to shut that shit down real quick by re-releasing The Little Mermaid in theaters the same week. This meant that Anastasia didn't profit nearly as much as anticipated. So, Fox laid off 300 members of their staff, and that meant they ended up needing to outsource a bunch of production stuff for Titan AE to other studios, which put everything way behind schedule. The outlook was bleak, and the people working on the film must have been dealing with an overwhelming sense of dread as it quickly went from being a creative and potentially profitable idea to a very expensive problem. Besides Disney coming in and breaking the movie's kneecaps with a fish, audiences may just not have been ready at that time for animated action movies. This was during a time in history where people still often associated the medium with children's films, and director Gary Goldman quite literally described Titan AE as not your mama's animated movie, because there was violence, very spicy innuendo, and swear words.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
So, not a lot of moms were taking little Johnny to see Titan AE, and teen boys likely at the time thought animated movies were for babies. They finally did finish the movie though, and it released to the tune of just under $37 million on a budget of between $75 and $90 million. A massive loss for an already struggling animation studio. In fact, just 10 days later, Fox Animation closed. But is Titan AE actually a bad movie? I mean, you be the judge. In my opinion, it has a lot of visually appealing scenes, but at the end of the day, it's really just a mashup of every science fiction trope without anything new to add to the genre. Just more of the same. And I think there was probably someone out there who could tell a better story about a young man on a journey through space to find a hidden mystery with his alien counterparts. I guess we'll just never know. Treasure Planet was just truly bizarre in the sense of what happened to it. There's no debate. It's an excellent movie. Critics loved it. It's a cult classic. It was made by the same duo responsible for The Little Mermaid, Aladdin, The Great Mouse Detective, and Moana. The marketing was on point. There were McDonald's Happy Meal toys, Pepsi soda box promotions, Dreyer's ice cream promos, Kellogg's made little Treasure Planet spoons that came with their cereal boxes, Hasbro manufactured action figures and toys, Puffin Books published a novelization. The marketing department understood the assignment 1,000%, and if they could, they would have tattooed Jim Hawkins on the back of your eyelids. It is still, as of this recording, the most expensive, traditionally 2D animated film ever made. Over 1,000 crew members helped bring this production to life, including computer artists, technologists, musicians, and more. Treasure Planet broke away from the cold space theme genre and created an atmosphere that was uniquely warm and romantic. The movie was nominated for a goddamn Oscar. I could not see why this movie was a flop. The math was not mathing. And then I found out that one of the creators pitched the film to Disney several times, and was rejected several times. And when I thought about how that pitch must have sounded, it kind of started to make sense. Imagine Treasure Island, but it's in space. But everything looks steampunk. Spaceships are still boats, and there's this hot lady, but she's also a cat. And the real treasure was all the father figures you made along the way. The Disney studio chief at the time, Jeffrey Katzenberg, kept saying he was really uninterested in the project, which pissed off Clement so much that he went directly to the Roy E. Disney, who then got the movie greenlit by Eisner. The result was one of the biggest, most expensive box office failures of all time. But why? Just because it was a bizarre premise? Well, not exactly. The protagonist was older and had that bad 90s attitude with equally bad hair. The story may have also been just a little too familiar. There were also a ton of Treasure Island remakes happening at the time, so the story was just too predictable. Besides that, it was the 2000s, and audiences were gravitating more towards CGI and less towards traditional animation. The movie came off as this bizarre, unmitigated, thematic chaos that may have just either been too ambitious, ahead of its time, or maybe both. And finally, Treasure Planet was competing with other massive releases at the time, including Harry Potter, Chamber of Secrets, and Santa Claus 2. That's right, the Santa Claus 2. For whatever reason, though, The film's massive failure resulted in Disney shelving the planned franchise, which included a theatrical sequel, direct-to-video movies, and a TV series all based around the movie. The movie had a budget of $140 million, around double the budget of Titan AE, and made $109.6 million at the box office, an excruciating $30 million disparity and a pretty hefty price tag for an I told you so from the studio chief Katzenberg. However, the movie remains widely regarded today as a classic, unimpeachable part of the Disney catalog, and it has a rabid cult following because, at the end of the day, the writing is excellent, and it's a downright gorgeous film that captured the imagination of audiences, where it lives in perpetuity to this day. One could argue that space boy adventure movies just didn't capture the audience they hoped for, and that we have since moved into an era where universal appeal is more important than telling these singularly focused coming-of-age stories about young men whose dads are, for some reason, either missing or dead, going on these journeys to discover what they believe and what's important to them. People who love animation want to hear stories that mirror their experience, and targeting adolescent boys who might not have been interested in 2D animated movies in general just wasn't profitable. These kinds of movies had already been tailor-made for little girls for decades, and as a result, were seen as being for them and smaller children. And this was all happening during the height of console gaming, the proliferation of anime in America, and a ton of other things that had significantly more appeal to that specific demographic. Movies like these are by far not going away. In fact, ones with similar plots have been released every year since, but they no longer have this focus on these angsty young men with daddy issues, and it's not hard to see why. The people who made these movies thought they were about to eat, and the market slapped the plate right out of their hands. So we aren't likely to see Treasure Planet 2 anytime soon, or really any movie that focuses on a character like this, because as much as we love them now, they are made for an audience that just doesn't watch them. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell to help me protect my giant robot friend from the government. If you have any opinions or you learned anything, tell me in the comments, and I'll see you next time.